The disciples had asked Jesus concerning the end times, when the end would come, what would be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age. And Jesus had begun by warning them not to be misled by false prophets, and not to be concerned about the fact that there's going to be continual war and strife among nations, and that there's going to be pestilences and earthquakes and famines. That's just the warm-up, the opening scene. They will be persecuted. They will be targeted. There will be many false prophets who will deceive. Many will grow cold in their love for God. But continuing in verse 13 of Matthew 24, he says, "He who endures to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached to all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place," whoever reads, let him understand, "then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house, and let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days, and pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath, for then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened." My name's Arthur. Thank you for joining me as we seek to understand these verses from Matthew 24, 13 to 22. There's going to be great pressure on people, focused particularly against the Jewish people. "You, the nation of Israel, shall be hated by all nations for my name's sake," Jesus had said. And the focus of the message that they will be proclaiming is, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand," the gospel of the kingdom, which Jesus proclaimed, but when he came to take up his throne, they did not take him, because he's a Prince of Peace. He didn't come with an army to take the throne. He came in peace to receive the throne, and they wouldn't give it to him. Therefore the nations have been in turmoil ever since, and false Christs have risen up to take the throne of the world from one another, and just brought more war and war and war and war. And God's people have to endure all this lawlessness and hatred going on in the world. But they have a message that Christ will establish his kingdom, and it is only after this message is proclaimed that the end will come. Jesus then refers his disciples back to Daniel. "When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." So the holy place is the temple, and the temple doesn't stand at the present time. So this prophecy is for the future, when the temple is rebuilt. We should read what Daniel has to say, and we can read about it in Daniel chapter 11. The first part of the chapter deals strife between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, king of the north and the king of the south, based in Syria and in Egypt, in the period of time between Malachi and the New Testament, before the Roman era. And from verse 29, "At the appointed time, he," that is, the king of the north, "shall return and go toward the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. For ships from Cyprus shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant, and do damage. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. The forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress, and they shall take away the daily sacrifices, and place there the abomination of desolation. Those who do wickedly against the covenant he shall corrupt with flattery, but the people who know their God will be strong and carry on. And those of the people who understand shall instruct many, yet for many days they shall fall by sword and flame by captivity and plundering." What actually happens in this prophecy is we skip from the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, who was the king of the north, and when he couldn't gain victory over the king of the south, came back and took his vengeance out against the nation of Israel in the middle and defiled the temple, offering pig's broth on the altar, and promoted those who were opposed to God and oppressed those who served God. And then the prophecy goes on to say this state of affairs will continue for a long time. For many days they shall fall by sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. And of course, attacks against the Jewish people have continued from that time and continue today. And when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help, but many shall join with them by intrigue, and some of those of understanding shall fall, to refine them, to purify them, and to make them white, until the time of the end. So again, Daniel is bringing us forward to the time of the end, but it is still for the appointed time. So this abomination of desolation mentioned so far actually happened in the past. But Jesus, speaking later, referred to it as being in the future. And so it shall happen again. And that's described as we continue in verse 36. Then the king, so this is a future king, we know him as Antichrist in the New Testament, shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and shall prosper until the wrath has been accomplished, for what has been determined shall be done. He shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall exalt himself above them all. But in their place he shall honour a God of fortresses, a God who his fathers did not know, he shall honour with gold and silver, with precious stones and pleasant things. He shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance in glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many, and divide the land for gain. This Antichrist is full of himself, and using his power to overcome all resistance. And of course, we learn much more about him when we read the revelation of Jesus Christ concerning the tribulation period. So we see this king will exalt himself above every god. Daniel continues, he shall enter the glorious land. Many countries will be overthrown. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. But news from the east and the north will trouble him. He shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate them, and plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him. Paul explains a little bit more about this man in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, where he says, the end will not come, that day will not come, unless there is a departure first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. And when the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will consume with the breath of his mouth, and destroy with the brightness of his coming. The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth, that they might be saved. So, coming back to Matthew 24, Jesus saying, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place. So, when this Antichrist comes and sits in the temple of God and proclaims himself to be God, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days, and pray that your flight may not be in winter, or on the Sabbath. This man will oppose God and oppose the people of God, proclaiming himself as God. And in that day, God's people need to flee him.